NFL Week 14 is here. I'm here with Ron. I've got one very important question to ask you, Ron. Why won't Baker go away? He was just signed with the Rams. They say he may play on Thursday. This is sensory overload for me. I feel like when the elections happened, I was through with the annoying, reoccurring themes that would come up with the political ads and the text messages, and every day it's Baker this, Baker that. I'm sick and tired of it. When's he ever going to go away? And is he going to do any good for the Rams?
Why would the Rams sign him? Are we talking 2023? Because the Rams aren't going anywhere in January this year. They're staying home. Is this an audition for 2023 in case Stafford says I'm done?
I have a feeling that Stafford's done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Have you don't have that same feeling?
I'm not as close to the Stafford situation. He's got his ring. He's played all his years. If it's the kind of injury that won't go away, that's going to linger, I understand possibly retiring. But there's the competitive juice in these people that he's young enough in today's physical fit world that I would think he would give it one more go.
I guess they just don't have any confidence in the quarterback situation that they have there. And who knows? Maybe they're playing keep away, but that doesn't make sense either. It is a strange signing. I'm not sure why they would want to even entertain the thought of bringing him back next year. I just don't see it. I feel like Baker has proven that he's not going to do anything anywhere, as far as I'm concerned. Do you have any hope at all in his success with anybody?
It would take a better offensive line than the Rams currently have. It would take a complementary running game, which the Rams currently do not have. And the wide receiver group is Cooper Kupp and a bunch of unknowns that haven't been integrated into the system. So this isn't a winning situation for him. I think Baker Mayfield's career right now, I envision it as being somewhat like Colt McCoy in Arizona, a relief pitcher that can certainly fill the bill for a few quarters, but if you have to rely on him for a whole season, I don't think he's taking you to the playoffs.
Yeah, but he's got an attitude issue that just rubs people the wrong way. I don't know why you would entertain that in your clubhouse. But enough about him. A little bit of good news. Jimmy G might be back for the playoffs. He does not need the damage is not as bad as we thought. And as somebody with San Francisco futures and just a general feeling of empathy for a team that just gets decimated with injuries every year, you'd like to see the best teams face off in the best possible scenarios that they can. And, I don't know how they're going to do, but I think they've got a pretty big problem this weekend. What do you think?
A pretty big problem, huh? Let's see. This week they play Tampa, and Tampa had new life where they shouldn't have had new life last week to get that win. San Francisco's defense, they're going to batten down the hatches and do what they've been doing all year and shorten the game and hope that Purdy doesn't lose the game for them. The more game tape that appears on Brock Purdy, the easier it's going to be for opposing defenses to scheme. I don't think Tampa's quite ready to scheme for Brock Purdy because it's too early. We don't have enough game tape, number one, and also Tampa has a short week this week. So that works in San Francisco's favor. I would just say probably expect a defensive struggle.
I had heard, do you remember from your draft preparations? Because I heard on another show that there were actually 4 notable draft prognosticators that said that Purdy should have gone in the first round. This is before whatever year he came out. That he was first-round quarterback draft material on some people's draft boards. Do you have any recollection of how he stood on your scale?
I'm going to look it up right now as we speak. I'm going to go to Tampa Bay's page. I only have 2 pages on each team, so I've got to have something on them. Let's see where I got to go way down here to Tampa. Okay, so first of all, he was Mr. Irrelevant, the last person drafted, if I remember correctly.
I mean,
I don't know, to Tampa, to San Francisco.
Yeah, he's in San Francisco, Ron.
Yeah. Okay. I did not give him a rated grade. I liked his intangibles and has plenty of high-level game experience, but he lacked required arm strength and was late on deep throws. Height, arm, and length say backup quarterback. So his intangibles are there. He had plenty of college experience. The scheme San Francisco runs probably fits him because they won't ask him to throw deep. So we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, some of the commentary that I've heard is, this is the type of system that can work. They just need him. It's not like San Francisco's a deep ball throwing team with Garoppolo in the lineup anyway. So,
right.
And he's more mobile than Jimmy, so that gives him a few more options. So this may not be the disaster we thought it was, but we almost had the tight end coming in for quarterback last week, didn't we? Was that the right game? What was the game that they were down to the very last quarterback?
It could have been there or Baltimore because they were down to Huntley and with Jackson out.
I forget who it was. Maybe it was. I think it was San Francisco. I think that their next quarterback was going to be a tight end. That goes into. I have a banner here with the quarterback carousel. We saw Lamar's out. He's going to be out, this week for sure. Maybe another week. It's got me biting my fingernails about our futures on Baltimore. We've already discussed, some of the other quarterback issues. It's getting to be really bad. And I just want to revisit what we talked about at the beginning of the season is I think teams have to have two quarterbacks in tow for these long schedules. It's absolutely inexcusable to not have a quality backup. For gosh sakes, 3 of the quarterbacks in the NFC North started with the Lions this year. So, their backups in preseason are now on the Bears and the Vikings. And that's pretty pathetic. Do you think the case is being strengthened that teams have to have a solid backup in tow if they're going to really protect themselves adequately, or do you think they're going to kind of dismiss that?
Well, that depends on the salary cap. If you're paying a quarterback $50 million a year, like with Kyler Murray, you just have to. They're lucky to have Colt McCoy, and they're lucky to have Colt McCoy want to stick to that team and not worry about being a starter. But most of the teams that would not have salary cap issues, yes, you better have 2 quarterbacks because, first of all, they don't get enough reps in preseason to begin with because they're babying them and they don't want them to play in the preseason. Then they play and they take hits in this brutal sport where you have only 1 bye week and 17 weeks of action and then another 3 weeks of playoffs. It's not load management like in the NBA where you can take a couple of days off here and there. Every week you have to suit up if you want to make the playoffs. Once in the playoffs, it's a different story. But if I were a GM or a coach, I would definitely make sure I had a backup in the room that I could trust at least for a game or two. Not only a quarterback, but at several other positions. Your roster is going to be tested in this game week after week after week.
You suggested the topic of what did we learn in week 13? So what's the first item that you learned?
Okay, so I'll go first, and I'm going to say I think we're sleeping on Dallas a little bit. They're a sneaky, really, really, really good team. Metric-wise, they rush the passer like no other team. They have competency at tight end, competency at offensive line, competency at wide receiver. Dak Prescott does not throw interceptions. Pollard is absolutely a change of pace back that's running over 5 yards a carry, and not one of these receivers out of the backfield where they're just stretching the field like a glorified run. When Pollard gets the ball out of the backfield in a pass situation, he's a threat to go the distance. So Philly has been carefully put together by their GM, but I think we're sleeping on Dallas a little bit. I have Dallas higher rated than Philadelphia right now. And that's one of the things that was reinforced last week. And I just want to bring that up. I think Dallas belongs in the conversation to make a deep playoff run as long as their head coach does not get in the way.
I briefly thought about that, making that one of my three also, but then I remembered that we talked about this 3 weeks ago, and we brought up the topic, and I bought a Dallas to win the division future because all they need to do is gain a game on Philadelphia and beat Philadelphia, and they win the division. So I don't think that that's completely out of the question. I think that they're a solid team. I agree 100% with your take that I had them ahead of Philadelphia also. Philadelphia directly behind them, though, but I'll agree with that. I think my first one is I'd rather be lucky than good, sadly stated. I am facing some just asinine variance all year long with just bizarre results. And I think we could talk. I don't want to dwell on the Vikings because everybody's talking about the Vikings, and I'm getting sick and tired of hearing about it. But there's just a lot of teams or a lot of situations that where certain teams are getting painfully unlucky. The Jets 6 times in the red zone without a score, without a touchdown. Jacksonville had some heartbreaking losses earlier in the year. Just certain teams are benefiting from some really favorable variance, and certain teams aren't. And as I lose money on these bets, I would have preferred to have been lucky than good. The luck's going to run out at some point on some of these things, but you've got to have the luck factor, and that's the bottom line.
Well, in the NFL, as we saw in the playoffs last year, 13 seconds matter, who has the ball last matter. I mean, all those games came down to nail biters. It's one play or one bad decision or one drop or one call that changes things. I will say this about Minnesota: winning is contagious, especially for new coaches. And they went ahead and got some wins that they probably didn't deserve this year. But you're playing right into my number 2 area of what did we learn. And it's been reinforced, and I've talked about it before, but young teams need time to learn how to win. And there's nothing more, evident than what the Jets did or didn't do in that game against Minnesota. The Jets were the better team on the field, but they're not yet ready. They killed the draft, much like the Giants killed the draft. But there's youngsters that are just making too many mistakes, whether it be not leading a receiver into a catch, throwing behind them, or throwing too carefully, or making a mistake on a penalty that sets you back 5 yards on an illegal procedure. You just have to learn how to win in this league. And the Jets, the Jags, and the Giants were my 3 examples. These are teams that in the long run are going to be really good. I think the Jets have a very good future ahead of them, regardless of which quarterback they have. And I think the Giants have a very good future ahead of them with their GM, their coach. But right now they're playing youngsters in a lot of spots. And the Giants just left that overtime game. They had numerous chances to win, 70 minutes, and they couldn't pull that particular game out. And it's a game the Giants and the Jets, both of those teams would win those games next year, but they're not yet ready this year.
What's your number 2?
That was my number 2.
Oh,
young teams.
It segued so smoothly. I didn't even realize it was.
Yeah. You did it without prep.
Anything that you think you have figured out and within your grasp of knowledge, it's going to change on you at a heartbeat. It just seems like every time that you think you understand a team or you have confidence in a team, hey, San Francisco was going to win that division. Hey, Baltimore was going to win that division. Something mucks things up and it puts other teams in play. And injuries happen hard and fast. And you just cannot ever get overconfident in anything that you believe with what's going on in this league. You've got to be able to adapt right on the fly because something's going to affect whatever your thought process is. Kansas City, running into their Achilles heel. They can't beat Cincinnati. They're the better team. Cincinnati played a great game, and they're a great team. But Kansas City 0-3, that's a thing now. That's a realistic thing. So, a lot of people bet on Kansas City, expected them to win, and our tickets get thrown, torn up. So that'd probably be the second thing is just to always remember when you think you have it figured out, you don't have it figured out.
It's tough when you have 16 new coaches in a 2-year span when half the league is turning over their coaches. And we're just talking head coaches. What about assistant coaches, defensive, offensive coordinators, and so on? I've got a pretty good handle year in and year out on teams coached by Bill Belichick and teams coached by Mike Tomlin. But how to figure out Nick Sirianni in a short period of time, it took half of the season, for example, last year, Philly, to realize that, hey, they didn't have it figured out, and now they have it figured out. So if they don't have it figured out, we're not going to figure it out. We have to get inside their heads. You somewhat segued into my third thing because you have Kansas City losing 3 times to Cincinnati. And basically, with apologies to Josh Allen, the 2 quarterbacks that are the best in this league are Pat Mahomes and Joe Burrow. And there's no question Joe Burrow is ahead of Josh Allen, in my opinion, because Josh Allen has a wonderful GM, a good tight end, great wide receivers, a solid offensive line, some good running backs. And Joe Burrow has a makeshift offensive line, somebody at tight end, I can't remember who. They have good wide receivers. They're not running well at all. They do have Joe Mixon, but their yards per carry is very soft. Basically, Joe Burrow is Andrew Luck reincarnated, and let's just hope Joe Burrow has a longer career than Andrew Luck, and maybe Cincinnati understands protect your investment, because Joe Burrow is absolutely the real deal.
Well, it's amazing how we're segueing into these without even knowing what we were going to say. But my number 3 is welcome the new guard. And whether it's coaches or whether it's players, there's a transition of the older coaches seem to be, Belichick seems to be a little overwhelmed. Lovie Smith can't coach his way out of a paper bag. It just, you've got all these great new players. I've never seen more spectacular wide receiver play and catches ever.
Absolutely.
I mean, we have seen once in a lifetime catches. I don't know how many times this season. And we're seeing teams develop and excel at a very unusual rate. And we're seeing teams decay at an unusual rate. And it's basically the changing of the guard. You've got to, like when people are sitting there holding on to their priors, when we're talking about gambling, how can you hold on to the priors? You have to, the priors are meaningless with all the change that's happening and all the turnover that's happening. The priors can't be relevant, after a short period of time into a new season. Yet I hear people bringing up priors, and I just don't think that they count for as much as they used to back in the day, where it's an advanced, fast-moving world we're living in. And these kids grew up with TV and big games their entire lives. In our generation, being on television and being on a big game was a big deal. There's a lot of different pressures and stuff. These kids are recruited, as early as before they enter high school, and they're already on the radar of teams. And by the time they even get here, they've been through all kinds of big pressures along the way. It's just you have to just realize everything's changing very fast and just adapt to it.
Adapt. That's what I was going to say. Adapt or die. Nick Saban hated the rules that sped up games and his defenses couldn't get on the field and all that stuff 5 years ago at Alabama. What did he do? He started playing their game and he adapted. Andy Reid adapted. He said, I'm not going with the vanilla Alex Smith. The game is changing. I'm going with Pat Mahomes. Jalen Hurts, to your point, has plenty of big game experience. He played in national title games. He's done all these things. Tua has played in national title games. They're ready for the big stage, and the new coaches are taking advantage of it. I'm curious, and I said this earlier today, whether Bill Belichick adapts to the new world of speed, because his New England offense, with the exception of Randy Moss for a couple of years, lacked deep speed. He drafted a couple of players that have speed now. I think this is a speed football game. You're seeing it at linebacker. You're seeing it at rush defensive end. You're seeing it all across the offensive formations. It's time for Bill Belichick to adapt, and he's starting to draft faster players. I think New England falls behind if they don't go to this current trend of fast break football.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me as a Michigan Wolverine fan watching Michigan get their ass kicked every time they faced one of these teams that had nothing but speed, and just being so envious and realizing, what are we doing here? You've got to have players like that on our team going in the future, and they've graduated to that.
Yeah.
That segues into the topic you wanted to talk about, and I've got it scrolling there at the bottom. I'm actually sick and tired of talking about head coaches. But I agree with you wanting to bring up the topic again because you just can't go by a weekend. What did you want to say on it?
Well, if you're going strictly by metrics, if we each have our different way of handicapping games, but they overlap, of course, with the metrics and the situations and everything else that goes into it. But you've got to factor coaches in there somewhere. And one thing that I was thinking about last night is, in today's game, is it dangerous to hire a defensive head coach with all the offensive firepower that's going on? Because Dennis Allen is a defensive head coach, and he can't coach his way out of a paper bag offensively. A lot of people point to the fact that, hey, had the running back got one more yard or this or that or whatever. But this started in the first quarter. His third down plays were atrocious and didn't set up his fourth down plays. His first down plays were very predictable on a day that Andy Dalton was threading the needle. Andy Dalton was not the problem at all. He had some masterful throws under pressure and in traffic. And then not playing clock up 13 points, realizing that you're not just playing the other team, but you're trying to shorten the game because your defense is doing a wonderful job, and letting Brady get in rhythm the way Brady has gotten into rhythm time and time again. Dennis Allen does that. Lovie Smith does that. The Denver coach does that. Jeff Saturday's been overwhelmed in his coaching thing. At some point, that has to factor into the handicap equation, whether we like it or not.
I put it in one of my write-ups on one of the games this week. I wrote up a game, and it even happened to Andy Reid this week. He's trying a 55-yard field goal outdoors with no problem, and you're going to give the ball to Burrow with 3 minutes to go, only needing a field goal. I mean, and Reid is just like, Reid to me is like what Harbaugh is to you, where Reid just does something dumb once every 4 or 5 games, and you can't figure it out because you respect the guy. He's a great coach. There's a lot of great things about him, but he's just brain dead on a in-game move oftentimes, and it's just surprising. But it's happening every single week where head coaches are costing themselves games in circumstances where they should have somebody hired to say, hey, do this, do that. Don't forget about this. Don't forget about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a terrible situation because each game stands on its own. There's no one analytic fits all. When you're playing New Orleans, Tampa Bay, they play twice a year. They play defensive-minded games. They've gotten into Brady's head. When you're playing games like that, your situations are different than when you're playing a fast break team like Arizona or somebody like that. And I don't think all these coaches adapt to who they're playing, time management. When there's 8 minutes left on the clock, The clock matters more than anything else. You cannot be throwing incompletions. You're counting the number of possessions that the other team has. And you knew Tampa was having trouble getting down the field in bunches. They were having to throw the short stuff, but you left them enough time for Tom Brady to complete all that short stuff. And then you go deep once and the guy mugs him for a pass interference call. But the game was lost not just at the end. The game was lost early on with what Dennis Allen was doing. When the score was 16-3 and they had the ball, basically you knew it was going to end 17-16. There was no other possibility. And I want to say one other thing about coaches. I think we're babying some of these quarterbacks. And I think the coaches are to blame for that. At what point, why can't we trust Marcus Mariota, who's been in the league 6, 7, 8 years, to throw more than 20 passes a game? Why does Atlanta's game plan include run, run, pass, run, 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 and something like that? This is the NFL. You're playing right into the opponent's hands. Something's going on in Atlanta where they're not trusting their quarterback. I understand it with Justin Fields. He's new to the league. He's not willing to throw in the tight windows. He didn't have a lot of reps in college. He didn't play 3 years of college starting every single year. But teams that have quarterbacks such as Marcus Mariota, you mentioned Baker Mayfield. These teams don't trust their quarterbacks, or they're not. Their schemes are just not good enough to adapt.
Yeah, and the only area that I don't have a problem with babying a quarterback is you don't throw in, and I realize Burrow is the exception, but you don't throw in new quarterbacks in a position of where they can't be protected, and they're just like, in an overwhelming situation, all coming at him at once. And Burrow is the exception because he was thrown in front of a shitty offensive line. He did get injured. He's recovered nicely from it. But he's the exception to the rule. You don't want to do that to a quarterback. And as you mentioned last week, Aaron Rodgers admitted that the best thing that he ever had happen to him was bench riding behind Favre. But yeah, I know, I agree 100% with you. I don't understand with they're either quarterback or not. If you're going to limit the range of what you're going to allow them to do, the other team's going to know that and going to be able to scheme against that stuff.
Yeah, I think Atlanta could have been good enough to win a lot more games.
Yes,
but they're not trusting themselves. And Russell makes a good point in the comments. Marcus Mariota by no means is a great quarterback, and maybe it is time down the road that they're going to go with their rookie later on if they're eliminated. I don't know if anybody's ever going to be eliminated in that division. But next year, their plan is probably to upgrade at the quarterback position. But you're not even giving him a chance to succeed. And that's where I have the problem.
I've got one question for you. Just going to change the subject. How many teams are there in the NCAA football?
131 of the teams that are in that, whatever you want to call it, Division 1A.
So you've got 131 teams, and you have over 1,000 people. You probably have an updated figure, but 1,000 people have entered the transfer portal. So an average of almost eight players per team is going to change. Yeah,
well, Tennessee in their first year with the new coach, 2021, I guess it was 2021, they had 27 players leave their team. This happens a lot with coaching changes, and they brought in about 20. Everybody said gloom and doom, but they brought in 20 players, and they got some good players and so on. The transfer portal is out of whack, and it should never be happening during the recruiting period and during the bowl season. This is ridiculous. 6 Big Ten quarterbacks, your bread and butter league with Michigan, Ohio State, and so on. 6 Big Ten quarterbacks are already in the transfer portal, I believe. 6 ACC quarterbacks are in the transfer portal. Maybe it's ACC and not the Big Ten, but it's just crazy because you're always one play away from starting. Why is the University of Pittsburgh quarterback transferring when he has a stranglehold on the job right now?
Well, I don't understand how the backup from the University of Michigan would enter the portal, and they're playing for the national title.
Yeah.
This entire portal thing is just lunacy. It is absolute lunacy. I don't have a grasp on it at all.
So he enters the transfer portal, he leaves, and then let's say the Michigan quarterback, or any quarterback for that matter, is injured in a third play of the game. Then you're going to go to somebody who hasn't taken a snap and hasn't even had practice warm-ups except for right now during the bowl season in a very pivotal game if you're in a 12-team playoff down the road, or if you're in a group of 6 game, or if you're in a playoff, any bowl game. It is just crazy.
We touched on this last week, so I don't want to duplicate too much of it, but I was discussing the bowls with a head of a sports book last night, and they don't even have the bowls offered. They're in no hurry to offer the bowls, and it's getting to the point where he said, quote, I think we should start booking it like college basketball. You know, put the lines up the day before or the day of and see what happens. With this transfer portal the way it is and the coaches moving around, I think we're heading a little bit toward that direction where you're not going to see all these lines pop out widespread everywhere all at once like we were used to, because it's not practical. There's just too many ways that a book can be taken advantage of with all the information. It's too much to keep track of. Do you see an evolution with this process come down the road?
It's a sad state right now. There's always books that want to be first. So what they're going to do is they're going to lower your limits. You're going to say, yeah, we're going to put them out right away, but we're just going to test the waters. We're going to offer you $1,000, $500, whatever it is. And then we're going to go to the bigger limits later. And they're going to find out where they're going to let the sharps go ahead and move the line for them and be the information gatherers for them. So you can start it out, but you have to have lower limits to start it out. It's, there's been probably line moves of 4 to 5 points or more in 10 games, 10 bowl games, 15 bowl games. We've seen tremendous line moves, and I made it a point to try to get ahead of the curve there, but I didn't pull the trigger very much, to be honest, because I intentionally hesitated because I don't have all the answers. Just because some people are in the portal right now doesn't mean the other team's going to have an equal number of players in the portal. They just haven't announced it yet.
Yeah, in touching on the subject we mentioned last week, I just want to know what the hell I have that I'm going to be dealing with. And if I miss a 5-point line move and I can't bet that game, oh well. Because you get some of these games that move 5 points one way and then they move back 7 points. And it's just outrageous. And as I touched on last week, there is information readily available to people that is not public, that people are making moves behind the scenes. Some of the sports books know whether players are going to play or not early, and they're making their adjustments and making their offerings more enticing on in those situations. And you're getting kind of hosed because you're at a deficit of knowledge that they have that you don't. And there's other bettors, shaping markets that have that knowledge that you don't, creating a false value. And I'm give me until the day before the game or the day of the game, probably for most of my bowl bets this year.
It's a tough situation. If a line looks too good to be true, it's possible that it is too good to be true because of this information. I don't want to be guessing lines. I'd rather be using my metrics and my tried and true bowl strategies. There's a lot of stuff out there. Part of it is anticipating what players will play, what the motivation is, what travel is. Do they want to go to the bowl? Do the fans want to go to the bowl? Are they stuck in purgatory? Does a team like Clemson or Oklahoma that, they're used to big bowl games? Do they care about playing in the Poland Weed Eater Bowl or whatever the names of some of these bowls are on a Tuesday instead of on New Year's Day? And then I want to run simulations of the games, and I always run simulations of the games, but my simulations are compromised because if I'm running simulations of games where 5 players on offense are not playing, it's not a true simulation anymore.
Well, then
So
how are you? Explain how you run these simulations.
I have the data. I have a program that I use to run the game, and I match it up and I look at how it matches up from an offensive and a defensive standpoint. And where I align with my metrics and where the simulation aligns, if we're on the same side, it tends to hit about 60 to 65% of the time. Although last year it was 7 out of 8, and the year before it was like 6 out of 7. So maybe I'm shortchanging myself. The simulations are very important to me to see how this runs, because believe it or not, at full strength, when people don't opt out, the stuff that works in the regular season tends to also work in the bowl season. But there's just so many variables and variants right now, not only with players, but if interim coaches, do you know there's an interim coach on one of the teams? I don't have it in front of me. Not an offensive coordinator, not a defensive coordinator, not even a line coach, but it was some sort of management analyst who worked up in some booth somewhere who's now going to be the interim coach for one of these teams.
I've got my Amazon app open here. What's the name of that program that we can order for the simulation?
No, you can't order it. It was hand done about 30 years ago, and I've kept it and so on. There is no way to order it. It's a DOS program. For those that are as old as me, it's DOS. DOS.
Oh, well, then you're getting a kick in the nuts for that.
Okay, yeah, I share a lot of things nowadays because I don't mind sharing them. I'm winding down my career and stuff like that, but that's one I'm keeping to myself.
I don't blame you. Any going back to the NFL? Anything stand out this coming week to you? Oddities, observations, things that scare you, things that go bump in the night?
Everything scares me these days with these day and age. You know what's scary is, other than Lovie Smith, Cleveland wins a game by double digits with Deshaun Watson, and they don't score an offensive touchdown.
Yeah.
I mean, they looked as bad as you can. He looked as rusty as you can look. And yet on paper, it looks like, 27-14. Did you read the box score? I mean, these are things that you have to look at how poor if Cleveland can play Houston every week, maybe that works. But now they're heading to Cincinnati, and Watson better clean up his act really quick playing Cincinnati.
I'll tell you one thing. My betting sonar is triggered on that Cincinnati Cleveland line because it just feels like they're telling you who's going to cover that game with where that line's sitting.
Well, it opened somewhere around 4.5. That's the first I saw it. I don't know what you saw it. And I have to be honest, I that is one of my early plays. I said, there's no possible way, due to Cincinnati beating Kansas City and Watson, all the what's going to be, that line can stay at 4.5. I mean, it was maybe it's a trap.
Yeah, but you're talking about predicting the line movement.
Right.
When it's all said and done, who's your money going to be on by the end of the week if that line closes 7?
Well, my money's going to be on both sides, and then I'll take a closer look at the game. To be honest, I would probably keep more of a percentage of my money at 4.5 because I feel like that's just too much line value for me. My power ratings would support a 7.5. They don't support a 4.5. And I'm not much of a favorite bettor. And Cleveland hasn't shown me enough of a defense. We've talked about it. Why is their defense underperforming? And Cleveland already holds a victory over Cincinnati, I believe. So Cincinnati needs this division. If there's a tie at the end of the year between Cincinnati and Baltimore, divisional record will come into play.
Yeah.
And so this is a game that's more meaningful in so many ways for Cincinnati. And more of my money, one way or another, will probably be on that 4.5 because I think that line was just not warranted.
Yeah, and just for reference, Cincinnati's 1-3 in that division, so they are going to have to get ahead of Baltimore to win that division, more than likely.
Yes,
That's just a really fishy line.
it
To
is.
me, it stands out to me as I'm not falling for the banana in the tailpipe. Uh, Anything else stick out to you? The 17 on Dallas actually came exactly on my numbers for once. I think
Me
that's a
too.
fair line.
Exactly on my number. Were you
Yeah.
surprised at the Buffalo line?
That's on exactly on my number also.
Okay. Yeah, I shaded it a little lower because I didn't believe they would put it that high. So I understand that being close, but I was just a little surprised at that because there was been some Jeff's love most of the year, and then all of a sudden you have this big line.
What were your thoughts on the Ravens and the Steelers line? That's a tricky line.
Let's see, the Ravens and the Steelers. I don't remember what it is now because I didn't have a chance to look this morning.
It's Pittsburgh by 7 now.
Pittsburgh by 7. Wow. That's in that series, you can't possibly do that.
It's only 2.5. I'm just testing you.
Yeah, no, yeah. I think it's still, if it reaches 3, it's a breaking point, a tipping point for Baltimore because of the intensity of the series, and these teams know each other inside and out. You don't have any rookie head coaches in this game. You have 2 coaches who have schemed against each other for years and years and years. We've seen backup quarterbacks cover in this series before. So any time, if the line touches 3, it would point me Baltimore or no play.
Yeah, well, you were asleep at the wheel because it was 3 all morning, and the drive-through closed on you when you were hungry.
No, well, I was out there playing tennis, sorry, but I'm more interested in what the closing line is for a game like this than the line movement in the middle of the week. I don't know if that makes sense to everybody, but it makes sense to me in terms of where the line ends up in a series such as this.
Here's a question. Where do you think that Minnesota-Detroit line will finish?
Now, Detroit has been bumped up, if I remember. They're like 2.5 now. Minnesota opened as the favorite.
Circa is at 2.5 minus 15.
Yeah, I have a lot of negative indicators on Minnesota in this game, but that's counteracted by the fact that my power ratings do not support this line, that the line at best should be pick 'em. I don't see how Detroit should be favored. Records aside, because records can be misleading, I don't think Detroit has earned the right to be favored over Minnesota and Kirk Cousins.
Okay.
Tough one for me because I have situations that definitely favor the Lions, but power numbers that definitely favor Minnesota. So it's probably going to be, well, one side's going to be right and one side's going to be wrong.
To answer the question, I think that there's certainly Minnesota money in the marketplace that's going to come in, and they're going to patiently wait to see if there's any indication that it's going to go up to a 3 in my book. But there will be Minnesota money coming in.
I agree. Yeah, if it touches 3, I think it would come off 3 within 15 minutes.
It just depends on the time of day and exactly when it happens, because that might be a situation where people want to bet big money. But I think people would be too anxious to allow that 3 to sit there.
Right.
The trailing 5 weeks on these two teams has Minnesota number 29, and believe it or not, Detroit is number 1 in the NFL last 5 weeks.
Yeah, it's easy to figure out that Detroit in its last 5 games has played night and day better than they did previously. Minnesota, you mentioned it last week, and it was a surprise to me last week. Not that I would have put Minnesota as coming on, but I would have said Minnesota's last 5 weeks, if you asked me, it would be in the 18 to 20 range. I would never have guessed that low.
Do you honestly believe Minnesota's a better team than Detroit?
Yes, because
Why?
because Minnesota has, it's that thing about teams that are trying to learn how to win, and maybe Detroit is turning the corner in that way. But I think when push comes to shove, I would trust Minnesota winning that game more than Detroit. They're relatively equal in talent, although Justin Jefferson is somebody that's pretty much unguardable. Certainly, the Lions are going to have a tough time with him. Kirk Cousins is incredibly accurate. And again, Goff, we've talked about Goff, who's having he's having a resurgence. So, I've always thought he's at least an average quarterback, just not an elite quarterback, replaceable at times, but maybe not right now. But the way you get to Goff is to pressure him up the middle. Minnesota has that ability to pressure him up the middle. I can tell you that if Minnesota doesn't get there with their pass rush, Goff's going to love throwing against the Minnesota secondary.
Yeah. Well, the Lions have one of the best offensive lines in the league. So it's going to be very interesting.
That's where the game is going to be decided.
I'm not so sure. It's going to be interesting to see who's favored to win that division next year.
Next year. Well, yeah, we'll see what happens. Detroit will have 2 high draft picks. If they can do anything like the Jets and Giants have done and take those draft picks and make them into usable entities right away, that will speed up the process. This is going to be about the draft for Detroit. Can they replicate what the Jets did, especially, and Seattle for that matter, who's really replenished that roster?
Well, they haven't even been playing with their number 1 draft pick until last week. So they're just putting him into the lineup. He was in the lineup of Williams as a decoy last week. And now you're going to add 4 first 2-round picks next year. You've got 2 first rounds and 2 second rounds. It's going to be pretty interesting to see what they do. The big flaw with Detroit is Campbell's he's a liability with strategy and in-game management. And I didn't watch the last game because it was already over by halfway through the first quarter. But every single game, he makes a time management problem or error, a strategy error, a 4th down decision error, some sort of an error on strategy that's avoidable. And I think if Detroit loses the game this week, I think it's going to be on Campbell. Something he follows up.
They have modest defensive numbers so far, so I'd like to see them build around Hutchinson because he can make other people better. But if they could build around him, I'll have to study their coordinator. I don't know if I don't even know who Detroit's defensive coordinator is off the top of my head, but I'd like to see them play a little bit better defensively.
Well, their offensive coordinator is he's working a miracle. They're saying he's going to be an instant new coach hire, and everybody's disappointed they're not going to be able to keep him.
Well, that's back to my point, though, that I think it's easier in this day and age to hire offensive-minded coaches because there are exceptions to every rule, but the defensive-minded coaches are not getting it done in an offensive-minded league.
So, somebody, Arthur Fonzarelli, says we have 6 of the top 75 picks. It's even better. It's nice.
Okay, so can I draft for them?
You know what? I think they did a fine job on their own. And then there's this kid, Houston, that was – I think he played his first game and got 2 sacks and 2 pressures or something. He was, all over the place. He looked like a seasoned veteran.
Okay. Well, we'll see. Hopefully they do a good job because the division is ripe for the taking. There's room to move up very quickly in that division. So use your picks wisely, the Lions.
All right. Well, we've got to close things up. Any last final things that you need to get off your chest? Any guilt?
Now, this is I was going to send you some of the charts that I use for the college because we're talking about data compilation time. So, there's 4 games on each sheet. I've got tons of data at my fingertips. I'm doing data research for all the bowl games right now. We're in the stretch run for the NFL. A lot of writing is going to be done. 2 key words. I'm sure you know these words well, Cris, but hopefully our listeners do too. Writing, which brings clarity, and networking, which you absolutely have to do this time of year, especially during bowl season and playoff entry season. Just because a team needs to win to get in the playoffs doesn't mean they are going to win to get in the playoffs, because if they need to win to get in, they weren't good enough in the first place. Networking and writing, that's what's going on right now with me.
You know what? I forgot to mention something that kind of makes me squeamish. It kind of triggered a little stress in my brain. Is when I first started seeing the playoff scenarios and the elimination scenarios, and boy, is that god awful annoying to kind of factor into your handicapping, which we're going to get into. Probably start talking about that next week. Because you kind of touched on it. Teams that get into must win, must lose is what I call them.
Yeah, it definitely, all those scenarios play at you. It has nothing to do with what futures you have or not have. It's really about all these scenarios, and the players are human too, the coaches, so they read the noise in the background too. Some handle it better than others. But when we get into the final 4 games of the season and the weather changes in some of these games, and it's a little bit more stressful, every play matters, fourth quarter decisions, and then it's survival of a war of attrition, really, because the rosters are still thinning out. We had a lot of injuries, not just to the quarterbacks that you mentioned, but we lost some key players last week for the rest of the season. And it's disheartening to see the number of injuries go up year after year after year. So at some point, you got to have the 2 buys in the NFL. But right now, we have to take a close look at rosters when we're making decisions and who to bet in December and January.
And let's not forget the unfairness of a team having a bye. And did they start week 4 this year?
I think they went 4 games. Week 5 was the first buys, and then they're playing 12 consecutive after that.
Yeah, and now we've got buys this week also, and that's just an unfair playing field as far as I'm concerned. They've got to level that out. If week 14 is just too late when you've got teams that haven't had a bye since week 5, it's
we're just about cashing our Chicago Bear tickets, and one of the reasons is a new coach, late bye week. You can't, those combinations are just deadly to these new staffs. The Bears, with a whole new staff and no room to make decisions or changes on a week-to-week basis, have to wait all the way till December before they have a full week off. It's crazy.
And I guess that's going to sum it up. You did mention that you thought the trade deadlines passed. So when Garoppolo went down, you can't trade for a quarterback. So I saw you tweet out something along those lines, and just an oversight, I'm sure. But that does put teams in a difficult situation if they, in this sport of all sports, if you can't trade and you're running out of quarterbacks, what are you supposed to do? I mean, go to the, it's not like you can get a quarterback at the supermarket.
The Rams got Eric Weddle out of the supermarket last year, so maybe there's a quarterback that retired. You never know. Some of these guys that are only 1 year removed from playing, maybe you get somebody off the streets, and you get Eric Weddle made a key play in a playoff game that got the Rams to the Super Bowl. So you do whatever you can, but I think the 49ers right now are just going to coach and scheme Brock Purdy like we started the show with. Just make him comfortable in what he can do and what they can do, and shorten the games with their defense.
I'm ending this abruptly. I have a hard stop. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody.
See you next week.